Today we're going to touch on something that you should have already learned in middle school, but we're going to cover it and kind of go even further and beyond. GCF, in other words, greatest common factor. So when I'm talking about the greatest common factor between the numbers 18 and 30, I'm going to list out all my factors of 18, the numbers that multiply together to be 18. So 1 and 18, 2 and 9, 3 and 6, and then my numbers for 30, 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, and 5 and 6. They have a lot of common factors, 1 is in both columns, 2 is in both columns, 3 is in both columns, 6 is in both columns. But the greatest common factor between 18 and 30 is 6. And we're going to use this a lot. However, we're going to use it a lot more with variables. How might we find a greatest common factor when we're dealing with variables? Well, the factors of y to the fifth would look something like this. Y times y times y times y 5 times. And the factors of y to the third would be y times itself 3 times. And the factors of y to the seventh would be the same exact thing, but y times itself 7 times. And so when I'm looking there, they have a lot of common factors. In fact, they have lots of y's. But they all have at least 3 y's. Each of them has at least 3 y's. So the greatest common factor between y to the fifth, y to the third, and y to the seventh is actually y to the third. And this is because the GCF of a set of variables is simply just the variable with the lowest exponent. The lowest exponent. So make sure you write that down. The GCF of a set of variables is the variable with the lowest exponent. So my next example has x to the fourth, x, and x to the second power. Well, my greatest common factor between those 3 terms, I'm going to look for the variable with the lowest exponent. So my GCF is x. We're going to use these 2 pieces to kind of help us factor out a greatest common factor from a polynomial. So let's practice. Flip over to the other side. I have these numbers 18, 15, 3, and 6. If I look at just the numbers, my GCF between those is 3. I can divide a 3 out of each of those pieces. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Draw that little upside down division sign. And I'm going to take 18 divided by 3 is 6. The y to the 4 stays the same. 15 divided by 3 is 5. The y to the 3 stays the same. 3 divided by 3 is 1. Y to the second stays the same. And negative 6 divided by 3 is negative 2y. But then I'm also going to look at my variables. Y to the fourth, y to the third, y to the second, and y. So when I want to look at my GCF of my variables, I'm having the lowest exponent, y. I'm going to divide all of these terms by y. Let's really quickly remind ourselves here. When I have y to the fourth divided by y, when I have division, I have to subtract my exponents. So y to the fourth divided by y is y to the third. So when I take 6y to the fourth divided by y, I'm going to get 6y to the third. 5y to the third divided by y, I'm subtracting 1 from my exponent, and I'm getting y to the second. Y to the second divided by y, I'm going to get y by itself. And 2y divided by y, my y's are actually going to cancel out, so all I have left with is 2, minus 2. And my final answer is going to be written something like this. Or I have my simplified form written in some parentheses, and my greatest common factor that I factored out is going to be written outside my parentheses. And this is my final answer. Let's look at number 1. 34 and 8 and 16. The GCF between those numbers is 2. So I'm going to divide a 2 from each of these pieces. 34 divided by 2 is 17. X to the fourth. 8 divided by 2 is 4. X to the third. And 16 divided by 2 is 8. X to the second. Then when I look at my variables, x to the fourth, x to the third, and x to the second, my GCF out of those variables is my lowest exponent, x to the second. So let's divide by x to the second. 17x to the fourth divided by x to the second is 17x to the second. My exponents to subtract from 2. Negative 4x to the third divided by x to the second is negative 4x. And 8x to the second divided by x to the second is just going to be plain old 8. So my final answer is this simplest form in parentheses and my greatest common factor that I just divided out outside of my parentheses. Number 2, 45, 27, and 18. My greatest common factor between those three is 9. So let's divide by 9. 45 divided by 9 is 5y to the third. 27 divided by 9 is 3y to the second. And 18 divided by 9 is 2y. But then I also have my y's. Y to the third, y to the second, and y. My greatest common factor out of those terms is y by itself, my lowest exponent. So let's divide by y. 5y to the third divided by y is 5y to the second power. 3y to the second divided by y is now 3y. And 2y divided by y is just plain old 2. So my final answer here is that simplified in my parentheses, and that 9y, my greatest common factor that I factored out, goes right outside my parentheses. Let's do one more example. This one has a few more steps because it has two variables. So let's look at my numbers first. 32, 16, and 8. My GCF is 8. They all can be divided by 8. So 32 divided by 8 is 4, and my variables stay the same. 16 divided by 8 is 2, and my variables stay the same. And 8 divided by 8 is 1, and my variables stay the same. Now I have an x and a y. We're going to treat them separately. So let's look at just the x's. X to the fourth, x to the third, and x to the second. My greatest common factor out of those is x to the second. So I'm looking at just the x's. I'm only going to divide x to the second. So all of these exponents right here are going to be subtracted by 2. So 4x to the fourth is now going to become x to the second because I divided by 2. 2x to the third divided by x to the second is now going to be x. My y stays the same. And x to the second divided by x to the second, it's going to cancel out. All I have left with is 1y. Then I have to deal with my y's. They all are in those terms. So I have y to the second, y to the third, and y. So my greatest common factor between those is y. Let's divide by y. I'm subtracting 1 from each of these exponents. So my final answer here is 4x to the second stays the same, but now it's y because y to the second divided by y is y. Y to the third divided by y, it's going to become 2x y to the second. And 1y divided by y, it's going to just be left with 1. So my final answer, I'm putting all that simplest form in parentheses, and everything that I factored out, everything that I divided out, is a part of my greatest common factor that I put right outside of my parentheses. Your assignment today is that double cross page. It's a little riddle on there. You only have to do the first side only. You're going to show your work on a separate piece of paper, please.